certainly across Forestry England, we experience sort of record numbers of people getting out onto our sites. And we still are. I think you'll have seen in the video there up at Wendover Woods, we would normally have had 900 cars in over last weekend, and we had 3,000. It's not been reflected across all of our sites. So some of our sites haven't had that sort of peak, and it may be just due to where they're located. But for the most of our highly developed sites are experiencing those peak visitor numbers. And a lot of those, I think we had about 16 to 20% were actually people that wouldn't normally have come to those sites. So I think Andy was reflecting on how we get the information to those people. Should we change our sites to respond to those changing demographics and those changing users? Should we be doing more? And whether we will need to make those infrastructure changes, or whether we just need to provide people with a little bit more information before they get to site. One of the other reflections that we had was how we might actually engage with some of these new visitors, because in the past, people would have used our websites to find out the relevant information that they needed to make decisions before they came to site. But we found that a lot of our new visitors aren't actually going through those channels that we would have used previously. And so some of the reflections that we've had internally have been how we might communicate with those new visitors. So certainly if anybody has got any great ideas about how we might use alternative ways to communicate pre-information visit to those people, just so that, you know, when they arrive at site, they have an expectation of what they're likely to find, what they might need to bring with them, and sort of things they need to think about before they come to site. So if anybody's got any great ideas to share on that, that would be appreciated. In terms of communications, I think we've reflected quite a bit on signage. And one of the things that we're going to do within our own signage suite in Forestry England is to go through a lot of the signage as the pandemic has kind of progressed. It's been very reactive. We've had to change. The government guidance has changed quite frequently, and some things have got switched back on and then they've been switched back off again. So we kind of have a suite of very reactive signage at the moment, and we're going to try and take the sort of period of the winter plan to kind of reflect on those signs and come up with a more simple suite that reflect those kind of core messages. And I think it's just going back to the kind of risk control spectrum in the beginning, that we had to prepare people. We had to give them lots of information. COVID-19 was incredibly new. And so the actions that we took in place are probably more than we need to continue to have in place now. So one of the reflections Jenny and I had was that, you know, the sort of social distancing messaging and the hygiene are things that we need to continue to share, but maybe some of the extensive messaging that we used early on can now start to be pared back, and we just review our signage suite and have a more condensed and concise signage suite with those kind of main messages that align with the government and their messaging as well. So that's something that we're going to kind of put into place now. Another reflection that we had about the signage is just getting the hierarchy right. We've seen quite a lot of images of sites, lots of signage, and if you're a sort of new visitor to the site, it's about where you look for that information that you need. You know, what's essential, and I think there's lots of messages that we have usually on our sites about maybe picking up after your dog, kind of those sorts of, you know, litter, barbecues, standard messaging. And in the summer, obviously barbecues was a sort of key issue, and we had lots of signage up about those. But again, it's about evaluating what information we're providing, and maybe some of those more day-to-day messages we can remove, just to kind of reduce the amount of signage on site, make it a bit clearer and make it a bit prominent, using visuals wherever we can. And again, from the piece that we did was reflecting on the longevity of those signs, and how many of these are going to need to be in place for a much longer period. I think the length of this has kind of surprised us in terms of how long it's been going on. So our laminated signs are starting to blow away in the wind as the weather's changing. We've got water ingress. They don't look great. So a lot of them are now being converted into a semi-permanent format so they can last a bit longer. Things that are up around our play furniture, for example, hygiene messages. Yeah, I think those are some of the reflections that we've had. Rob, did you want to share your reflections?
Yeah, so Bob Campbell from Natural Resources Wales, work down in South East Wales. But just picking up on one of your points there about how we, you know, that messaging, all the messaging from the main organisations, you know, yourselves, us, and large landowners, is all there. But what's the problem is the people that are coming to our sites, our new visitors, are not getting there. And maybe we need to look at and find some new approaches. And maybe the only thing I can think that's consistent with all those new visitors is they go and buy something first. You know, I've got friends who work in outdoor shops in Cardiff, and they've never had this before. They're taking pre-orders for sit on top kayaks and inflatables and climbing gear, being paid for now to be picked up next Easter. And so maybe there's a way of going, can we get them to help signpost where that messaging is? Be responsible in the outdoors, go here, you know, a swing tag on a purchase, or a postcard that they give out at the till when they sell stuff. And if we think about those, you know, I think this summer, those visitors bought those things locally because they weren't allowed to travel. And so we stand a good chance of at least getting a larger percent of those people with our messaging, if we can reach out to, and I don't know how we do that cooperatively, you know, maybe within Wales, it's through Visit Wales. Maybe, you know, in England, we can use you know, some sort of forum where you all together, but actually have a consistent, simple message that we use. Where and the only thing like I say, the only thing I can think where all these people are doing before they come to our sites is they're buying something. They're going to Tesco's and buying a, you know, disposable barbecue. They're buying a sit on top to take on a lake, whether they're allowed to or not. And so I think we need to be a little bit clever with how we present that signposting to our information. All our information's there, it is people aren't seeing it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So maybe the use of third-party advocates, so local bike shops, local outdoor shops, just maybe providing them with a little bit of information that they can pass on to their customers. And I wonder whether sometimes as well the message might be a little bit more or better received if it doesn't feel like it's the landowner kind of enforcing the message, if it's actually advocates sharing that out and about. That's actually, yeah, that's a really good idea. I think
we're always going to be the fun police, aren't we? So if the message is coming from the cool brand that you're buying your stuff from, it's going to be far more accepted than if it comes from the fun police, which is the landowner or anyone else. But if that's done in partnership with them, then that's really key, I think.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. I mean, I think the problem probably that a lot of people have experienced is that there's kind of issues that you're trying to tackle that have been COVID related, such as we've had like a kind of surge in wild trail building, and so you do feel like you kind of have a lot of negative messages as well as the positive messages, and I think that's quite a hard balance to strike, especially when we're putting lots of stuff out on social media. It's a bit like, you know, don't leave your litter, don't barbecue, don't burn the forest down, don't build wild trails, and on the other side it's trying to equip people with the information they need to know before they come to site. Does anybody else have any reflections or comments on that? Or is there anything else anybody wants to reflect on from the presentations? If you want to just raise your virtual hand using the tool at the top, or pop something in the chat.
I mean, I'll just pick up where I was talking there. You know, we're looking that we've now got a behavioural scientist working within Natural Resources Wales, and one of the things we're going to do before Easter and before the waves of people turn up with their disposable barbecues and things that we don't really want them doing on our triple SIs and everywhere else is to look at what their thoughts are from a behavioural point of view of how we can influence that behaviour, and it'll be nice to get a kind of scientific view about how and if we can start trying to, you know, get that message across to a new user group that have kind of come out of the town centre where they would normally spend their Saturday afternoon, and are now in the outdoors, which is fantastic. We've been trying to do that for 30 years. We've finally managed to do it by default, but we just need them to be a bit more responsible. One of the other things I think we're keen on doing, and again we're at an early stage of this, is that thinking about, you know, our honeypot sites are getting massively overwhelmed, the same as everyone else's sites. Is there a way of signposting lesser well-known sites, but to the users we know that are going to be responsible? And so if we know we've got a user group, you know, bird watchers, photographers, you know, there are groups of users that have been using our sites for years with very little real problem. is there a way of getting in touch with them and going, hey, you normally go to this site, it's going to be really busy next Easter, have you thought about going to this other site that you haven't heard of? And try and, I'm not sure that it'll stand up, but it's a thought that we're looking at, is can we signpost lesser used sites to people that we think are going to be more responsible than the mass sites, where we don't have a staff presence, where we don't have car park and litter picking type abilities, where we can try and handle that increased load of people that way. Don't know yet, but we'll find out.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. I think one of the things that we've been experiencing at some of our sites is just that lots and lots of people just going to the nearest bit of green space, and we've got quite a few triple SIs that have taken a real pounding, and I know there's a Woodland Trust site near me as well, and just the numbers that have been using that bit of space now. There's desire lines that definitely weren't there before. Luckily, there's sort of no wild trail building, but certainly on quite a lot of our smaller sites, it's those other things that come with it. And I think in a lot of circumstances, people just want a local dog walking venue. I don't think they're necessarily thinking, oh, I want to go to a nature reserve, I want to go to a triple SI. So I think that's one of those sort of concerns that our wildlife team has flagged, is how we manage getting, as you said, those people maybe in the right place. So if they are a little bit more self-reliant, we can direct them to a more appropriate site. And I know it's something that we've been working on like a landscape scale, is identifying those honeypot sites and then trying to redirect people out. And that was sort of even before COVID. I think we had the sort of issues with triple SIs and volume of people, particularly where they're near urban centres, and trying to direct them out. But COVID has just kind of brought that to a bit of a head. I think we sort of joked earlier on, if we'd have just known that all we had to do was shut our sites for a few days to get our visitor numbers to go through the roof, we might have tried that. But yeah, wouldn't have wished this on the world. So that'd be really interesting to find out the results of that research, actually, and whether it's a reasonable ask to try and signpost people to the right places, or whether we're kind of pushing a truck up a hill. Be really interesting. Thanks for that.
Well, it is, and it's a numbers game. I think, if I'm honest, looking back now, I kind of go as someone who's worked in land management for quite a few years. What were we thinking? 69 million people weren't allowed to go abroad. What did we think was going to happen? They were all going to go out to our sites. We just couldn't react in time, was the reality of it, because we were locked down just as much as they were. We found they could visit our sites at the same time they did, and that just doesn't work. Now we've got a bit more kind of heads up that we know, come next Easter, we're going to have exactly the same problem, if not worse, if the weather's nice, and how we're going to manage that, both in terms of managing those visitors, but also, protecting the areas that need protecting. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Did you want to come in there, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think some of these points being raised around pre-planning and communication ties in with the piece of research that VSG is just about to tender for, that's going to look at influencing visitor behaviour. And I know that some members have really got behind this work, and they've been able to provide financial resource. I'm really thankful for that. So the piece of research that we're looking to go out to tender, there will be information that will go out to all members very, very soon, because we will want your help to recommend potential suppliers, but it will look at establishing behaviour change guidance, particularly around how we can use safety messaging. So primarily we're thinking about signage, but also other forms of hazard information communication systems. And we will try to ensure that this is consistent with VSG principles, in the sense that it will endeavour to encompass the widest range of visual messaging and communication, and make it applicable to all stages of the visitor journey. So even just thinking about people browsing their phones on the sofa, thinking about where they're going to go outdoors. So thinking about all the different stages of the visitor journey. So that piece of research we're hoping to get underway in the early 2021, and then have it hopefully available to members come September time. So that's just one to watch out for as well.
Brilliant, thank you for that. One of the other things I was maybe just going to share is something that we've been looking at in terms of forward planning, and I know that's not something we've been able to do over the sort of really reactive last 6 months, but it just kind of made me think when Bob was saying about the numbers that we're looking forward to going over the next sort of 6-month period. And while we're looking to kind of restart as much activity as we can in a COVID safe way, we are thinking about those long-term implications on our visitor numbers. And so we've been doing a bit of modelling, and we think there isn't going to be big fundamental changes to those increased numbers before Easter next year, because that's kind of where the government is pointing to in terms of, you know, things might be getting a bit safer, vaccines might be being rolled out, restrictions might be able to ease. So I think when we've been looking forward as to how we might release activity and start organising events, we've been kind of assuming that we're going to have a heightened number of visitors all the way through to Easter next year. And that just gives us a little bit of a chance to plan ahead about how we might manage activity on our sites. Events has been one where we've been particularly cautious. We have to date really only reintroduced activity for up to 30 people. Even when the government guidance, the numbers were a lot higher than that. And it was just because of the amount of people that were on our sites, and they're open. We have right to roam, we've got public footpaths coming through. And so we're not like a private estate. We can't sort of shut down the nation's forest. So those are some of the kind of things that we've been thinking of going forward, is actually, you know, that number is going to be really high for a long term yet. And so it may be Easter next year when we actually start to see sort of fundamental changes. I think it does depend on what people can get out and do, and whether the restrictions ease before then. But I think that's what we're planning for. I don't know if anybody else is sort of looking forward and thinking about those longer term impacts on visitor numbers to sites, or if they've got any other kind of good practice or indeed lessons learned from anything that's been taking place on any of your sites that would be useful to share. Fiona?
Hi, I'm Fiona from Forestry and Land Scotland. Hi Joe, nice to see you. We've been looking on the subject of events. We had already started looking at sort of trying to reapproach our way to revamp our events planning process for third-party events on our land. And COVID actually gave us, if you're going to look for a silver lining, it gave us a bit of a breather, because there were a certain number of months where absolutely nothing could happen. But in terms of how we're looking forward, what we're trying very hard to do is not reinterpret what either Scottish Government or the rolled out guidance via Sport Scotland, for example, is saying. But what we are doing is relying very heavily on that, and alongside our normal events process and our revised one that's going to be coming out soon, we've got an FAQ that basically said, look, this is the sort of thing we're going to be asking you, and we're asking for them to evidence that they are sticking to their sports guidance, which has come directly from Scottish Government's events guidance, but interpreted for sports by Sport Scotland, and then with sport-specific stuff by, for example, Scottish cycling, Scottish athletics, and so on. And we are actually going to be looking for that. We're going to say, have you spoken to local communities? Have you spoken to local emergency services, police, and so on, local authorities? Have you considered have you considered the popularity of sites? For example, Glenmore, near Aviemore in Cairngorms National Park, humongously busy generally, even more so, and a lot of the same stuff that other people have been talking about, the antisocial behaviour, the dirty camping, as we're calling it here. And is there a place, would we go, well, actually, you simply can't have your event there, but we will try and suggest other sites if we can, if it's an event that in theory would be something we would otherwise support. So I just wanted to say that we're asking for additional information. We're saying, this is what, come prepared with this stuff, because we're going to be asking you about how you're coping, how you're addressing these questions.
Yeah, so how they would interpret the kind of government guidance in the context of wherever they were proposing to do the event or activity.
But very much trying to remind them that I suppose that the event is not it's not the only thing that's happening. There's loads of other stuff, normal visitors there, as well as potentially the people who live there. That's really, really important, because so many of our sites are rural or remote rural, and we want to make sure that our the visitors to our sites are adding value, are being a positive impact, having a positive impact on these sites, not a negative impact.
No, I think that makes sense, because I think there is a lot of anxiousness. I think particularly when it went into the tiers, that you're encouraging people to cross from tiers into other tiers, and areas of high infection move into areas of low infection, and there is that interpretation that's down to members of the public to make before they attend sites. We
have had events that actually they were, in theory, they were going to happen. They were being planned responsibly, and they had permission, albeit from months ago, that had been reviewed and gone, well, actually it's probably fine. But when they actually looked at the nitty-gritty of the guidance that's now in place, and once they looked at the community, once they spoke to people, they went, you know what, this isn't viable. It's not something that we can do. And now we've got the different tier levels and so on. That's added in a whole extra different thing. So we've got quite a number of events which thought they were going to happen even up till fairly recently, but they've now been cancelled or postponed, hopefully.
Postponed. I think that's useful that they've actually made those sort of connections. They've made those decisions. They've gone through those processes themselves and kind of weighed it up.
I don't think we haven't had to put the foot down and be. As somebody said, the fun police. We haven't had to say you can't do this, because it has become clear through work that the event organisers has done, and the people they've talked to, for example, local authority, that it just can't happen. And so that's good that that's happened without us having to say, oh my goodness, you can't do that.
No, that really is good, because I think some of the experiences that we've had is that the organisers perhaps don't realise what's fundamentally changed on some of the sites, and I think they're completely unprepared for thinking about how people get from a car park to the event or back, and how they would use the facilities along with this big increase of visitors. And I think they're just remembering the sites as they were pre-COVID, and a lot has changed. So that's really interesting to know that the organisers are doing that themselves. That's really, really good. Might steal that approach.
Well, just go on to I'll put a link in the chat to where you'll find our FAQs and explain the process that we are going through.
That'd be really useful. Thank you. Elizabeth, I think my computer is actually not the right time, because I think we've just run over, haven't we? So
yeah, so my clock's reading 12:35.
Yeah, apologies everyone. My computer had a really low battery when it booted up this morning, so it's 7 minutes behind. It says it's 12:28, so I thought I was doing quite well there. Apologies for that. Is there anything else that anyone would like to raise? As I'm conscious we need to sort of sign off now, so everyone can go and get some fresh air and some lunch. I'll take that lack of hands that everyone's really happy or incredibly hungry and desperate to get out with the dog. So thank you all for coming to the VSG webinar. I hope it was really useful, and I hope the discussions have been helpful, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.